Welcome. My name is Dr. Jesse Joyner, and this is Professor Mark Freeman. And we are professors at Ascent College. We are an online Bible college that offers a undergraduate degree program in ministry leadership, and we serve primarily Assemblies of God ministry leaders and volunteers, but really anybody around the globe that wants to learn how to do ministry better and be equipped in ministry. We are here for you. And
Mhm.
today our topic is about transitions in youth and children's ministry. And I know that this is it's a very relevant topic, I think, for any church that has kids or youth, which is pretty much all of us.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Hopefully it is.
hopefully. And Mark is the director of communications for the New York Ministry Network of the Assemblies of God.
Mhm.
And he has experience as a youth pastor. I myself have experience as a children's pastor at a couple of different churches. And so here we are from youth ministry and children's ministry worlds, and we're going to have a little discussion right here about how to do transitions well. And when I say transitions, we're talking about like getting graduating students from, say, the elementary ministry into either the youth ministry, or some people call it preteen, or like a middle school ministry. It depends on your church context. But then there's also graduating youth into young adulthood, or a college ministry, or them just leaving for college. There's a lot of things that happen. We're not going to talk about like birth through preschool so much, but there's transitions there too.
Sure.
But let's focus on children and youth. I remember, Mark, when I was a children's pastor, I had little to no contact, unfortunately. I'm not proud of this. Little to no coordination with the youth pastor and the youth ministry. And I feel like I can learn from that mistake.
Mm.
And I know that we lacked a lot in being able to productively transition students from one to the next. So uh tell us about transitions and
Sure.
how to how to do them well. Just,
Yeah.
go where you want to go with that.
Yeah, well, my guess is you'll learn from as many of my mistakes as my successes in this as well. I think one of the reasons why it's something that I think conscientiously about is I kind of have a relatively unique perspective in that before I was a youth pastor full time for 13 years, but prior to that, I was actually an elementary school teacher for 6 years. So I have a little bit of I've got my foot in kind of both worlds, and honestly, given that my academic study was in elementary education, um, a lot of my like educational psychology and methodology stuff was in the elementary world. So thinking about how young children think. And so part of this interest in mine as it relates to handing off well or transitioning well from our kids ministries into our youth ministries, and then even like you said, from youth ministries into young adults, is is recognizing that there is a long-term journey. There is a discipleship strategy that in theory, best case scenario, considers wherever a student walks into your ministry, whether they walk in as a first or second grader, kindergartner, wherever, and hopefully, as should their family stick around, there is a process that you want to think through that in helping them live a lifetime of following Jesus. And so I think there's some really important things to be thinking through and thinking about. And it could be easy and I think is what happens, not intentionally, but naively. You think, okay, kids ministry looks like this, youth ministry looks like this, young adults ministry looks like this, and we're going to get our specialists in those areas. And that's good to have specialists in those areas. But if you're not thinking of potentially what those transitions look like, you can lose some kids along the way, and you can lose families along the way in some of that as well. And so, um, starting to have conversations between ministry areas can help you start to think about, okay, if we're looking at an individual's life from, early childhood through their young adult lives, and then obviously you can certainly talk about them as adult leaders, because in theory, this falls under the umbrella of the church's general strategy for discipleship as well. So that cohesion among all of those, all that area falls under that umbrella, is really thinking through, okay, how do we help transition students? We were just talking a moment ago, like that fifth, sixth, seventh grade years of a student's life are significant. First of all, there's already tremendous transitions going on in their personal lives, anyways, even outside of cognitively how they think, because those are the transition years where cognitively you're making the move from concrete. Our elementary kids are typically concrete thinkers. black and white. This is true. This isn't true. And as you get older, as you get through those fifth, sixth, seventh grade years, is when you really start like, wait a minute, not everything is just A or B. There's some C and D and X, Y, all those in between, and starting to think abstractly about ideas and thoughts. And when it comes to faith, right, that's where I think maybe we even get this idea and transition of I'm graduating from my parents' faith into my own personal faith, right? And some little kids, some young children get that earlier than others. I recognize that. Most of the time, I don't see that happening until sophomore, junior, senior year a lot of times. And in many, not until they leave their home, so to speak, and are on their own, and they're like, wait a minute, I don't have mom telling me every Sunday morning I got to get up and go to church. I get to decide whether I want to have the discipline of Sunday morning celebration together, things like that. So when we're thinking about, okay, we've got students in fifth grade, depending on where your church's transition points happen, usually it's either in fifth to sixth or sixth to seventh grade, really thinking through, okay, what is happening in them cognitively, but then also all the other major transitions in their life, going from elementary school to middle school. That's a big deal. My daughters just did that this year. I have a set of twins. They just did that this year. Like it rattled them. Like that transition and the expectations that happen from the elementary to the middle school life, like your hands are held really, really well in with good intention in elementary school. You're with the same teacher usually for the most part. Maybe you have one or two teachers you see for some differentiated instruction, but then boom, you hit the middle school and all of a sudden you got six teachers. You got to find your way around the building. Like I don't know if traumatic is the right term because that's probably over exaggerating, but it was significant. It was significant in their lives. Well, guess what's happening simultaneously within your church at that time? You're going from your elementary friends where you're the top dog in your kids ministry.
Mhm.
Now all of a sudden you're like, talk about low man on the totem pole, right? When you're transitioning into youth ministry. And so I think there's some things that we can do that helps with that transition. And the first thing that comes to mind, and then I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as well. Maybe if it wasn't stuff you did, things that you recognized in hindsight.
Yeah.
I think connecting the adult leaders and the kids ministry kids, adult leaders in your youth ministry and like familiar faces is going to be key. When my kids transition, sometimes elementary teachers moved up into the middle school, when they see those faces, it's amazing how calming it is for them. I know somebody, I recognize somebody. And so finding intentional ways for your youth leaders to connect with those older kids ministry kids, and it doesn't have to be, they don't have to be swing leaders that are in both ministries. Now, they certainly could if they have the margin for it, but familiarity with somebody I'm going to see that will go with that will help me make that transition. And then along with that, some familiar faces from your youth kids in kids ministries. One of the things that I'm so thankful that our church does is a lot of the worship leaders in the kids ministry are teams led by youth from our youth ministry. So every Sunday morning they're seeing familiar faces of youth kids helping to lead them in worship. And guess who they gravitate to immediately when they transition to the youth ministry? They see these faces of people who have loved them and cared for them, and that not only is that significant for the youth kids, but it certainly it's very powerful for our kids ministries kids that are making that transition. They see familiar faces, and if they're too siloed, which I think a lot of our kids and youth ministries are, sometimes that's an intimidating room to walk on a Wednesday night whenever your youth group is meeting. All of a sudden the big kids are there and it's like, I don't know anybody and I don't even know if I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah. I can't help but think of the word intergenerational ministry
Yeah.
when you're talking about
Mhm.
this.
For sure.
It's the idea of, which is getting a lot more attention now
Yeah.
in church ministry. It's the idea of like the cross-pollination of the
Mhm.
generations,
Yeah.
and having a vision and a strategy in your church to uh, do as much as you can, as often as you can, to intermingle the generations,
Yeah.
like from like the infants to the elderly,
Yep.
but everybody in between. And when you do that, like what you're describing with like say youth helping out with with worship for the children's ministry, or even vice versa, like if there's
Yeah.
ways to connect them in parts of the worship life of the church, they see each other and they interact with one another, and
Yep.
they do service together. That way, when they do transition from one to the next, yeah, like you're saying, they see a lot of these familiar faces and people that they've already done ministry with or that they've worshiped
Right.
side by side with. It's kind of like the mindset of siloed ministry
Mhm.
is just, and then there's the mindset of intergenerational ministry, and it's there are these two different worlds, and I think we need to extract ourselves from this siloed ministry
Sure. Yeah.
more and more.
Yeah, and I do think that is it seems like that's where things are trending, right?
Yeah.
Even just the term next gen ministry, right? That
Hmm.
kind of is this all-encompassing thought process of we're talking next generation, not just kids and youth, which I think is a healthy way to think through it. And it does, like, the next gen team at your church is your kids ministries leaders and your youth ministries leaders and your, if you've got rangers, if you've got girls ministries, a
Yeah.
lot young adult ministries, like I think it's a really cool way of thinking. Yes, we may have our individual ministries, but we're part of this next gen team, which I think, especially for a lot of young lead I point to myself, I'm not a young leader any longer. Especially for a lot of our young leaders, like, in their 20s and 30s, like, I think that's where ministry is going. It's this team mindset. And yes, you can have a great team in your individual ministries, but then when they get to see that they're a part of this big team, which is next gen ministry, I think that's energizing. I would find ways to have your all of those adult leaders, like, there's got to be touch points, even if it's a once a quarter of the year, where all your next gen leaders are coming together, so that it begins to implant in their mind, we're all in this together. Yeah, they're overseeing they're overseeing the young kids, and we're understanding the youth kids and young adults or whatever. But I think it gives a perspective that now when I'm leading wherever my ministry area is, it holds it in perspective of the whole life of that individual and the opportunity to serve them. And I think that's a big win for our churches, honestly.
Hmm. And that could potentially lead to, uh, pulpit swapping, if you will. You know how
Sure,
pastors do that?
100%.
What if you pulpit swap in next gen ministries where you have the youth pastor come and speak to
Yeah,
the children on a Sunday morning, and vice versa, or a Wednesday night, where
sure.
they switch it up, and that way the kids get to see the youth pastor.
Yeah, I love
Then
that.
if you reverse it, you've got a children's pastor talking to the youth, and maybe if they've been there long enough, the youth are like, "Oh, I remember them.
Yeah, yeah,
I had them 12 years ago, or whatever."
right.
And
Yeah.
he's
I
still kicking. She's still kicking.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that maybe forces you to do in a good way is to think about cohesion of language across your ministry areas as well.
Hmm.
Now, obviously, how you describe sin to a second grader is not going to be necessarily the same definition of how you describe sin to a sophomore or senior in high school. But having common language in your discipleship strategy that builds, just like in school, right? That we build upon the language. The precepts are the same and the principles are the same, but we kind of build the language and the understanding, especially as you get from that. When you're teaching sin to an elementary school kid, it's, don't lie to your parents, don't steal something, don't be mean to your friends. I'm not saying those are bad things. That's their world.
Yeah, the
When you're
black and
talking
white. Yeah.
about sin in the life of a high school student or a young adult, you're talking about manipulating people. You're talking about source idols of pride and approval and those sorts of things. Like,
Yeah.
but if we have a common understanding of the foundations of language across all these areas and we're building on them as we go, I think these are really healthy conversations for next gen leaders to have together,
Hmm.
and thinking through how are we communicating the gospel and the principles and truths of the gospel so that there's some common language. All of a sudden, they're not hearing a new language when they transition to a new ministry level.
Hmm.
Um, I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's good. It also makes me think of a lot of schools talk in terms of like a portrait of a graduate, like
Sure.
painting the picture of, like, this is what we want a graduating 12th grader to look like in
Yeah.
school systems. Like, what if churches did that too?
Yeah.
As children grow up in the ministry of this congregation, what are some of the like formation
Sure.
goals that we would have? It's hard to measure spirituality, right? Or
Yeah.
even someone's faith. It's not like a math test. It shouldn't be. but I think we can have some general pictures of like, this
Sure.
is where we want to help bring these kids to, in a relationship with the Lord,
Absolutely.
and understanding their gifts and their callings so that they can serve the world
Yeah.
and serve God's kingdom in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I apologize for not knowing the answer to this question, but in the courses that you oversee in kids ministries, do you have a specific discipleship strategy type course at some point in your curriculum?
When you say, what do you mean by that discipleship strategy when you say that?
So like what you were just mentioning as it relates to, is there some dedicated lessons or a course related to what does a not necessarily a fully formed disciple of Christ look like at the kids ministry level, but what are the elements that we see as crucial ingredients, so to speak, in the recipe of what do we want a kid who's going through our kids ministries to experience that helps form it, being a follower of Jesus.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, to the extent that we study curriculum and scope and sequence of curriculum, I think that would pop in there. But as we're talking out loud about it, it's certainly something that I'd want to emphasize and highlight to a higher
Yeah.
degree, as you're bringing it up, because that
Yeah,
it's
one of the
super
courses
important.
I developed a couple last semester is a youth ministry discipleship strategy course
Okay.
because I recognized in my own ministry reflecting back too long ago now, that if it's not intentionally inserted, you tend to gravitate towards teaching the kind of the term is moralistic theistic deism, which is teaching kids to be good, right? And the
Right.
intentions are good. The intentions are we want to protect them from making bad decisions. We want to protect them from the hurt of those bad decisions. We want to show them what it looks like to be a Christ believer, a Christ follower. And in doing so, sometimes what we begin to do is we teach them how to look like a Christian without actually having a transformed heart and
Oh
the
yeah.
Holy Spirit that
Yeah.
allows that to happen. And it shows up, I think, way more in youth ministry maybe than kids ministries, because quite honestly, you can for a short period of time, you can teach a teenager to look like a Christian.
Hmm.
Of course, all that does is set them up for absolute disaster when they fail, and it's not sustainable if the Holy Spirit isn't. So one of the priorities when we were setting up our track for youth ministry is we want to dedicate a whole semester on talking through, okay, so what is a discipleship strategy? How do I use the environments that we have? How do I use curriculum or content, whatever we're using? How do I use the different ministry strategies, large group, small group, one-on-one, and how do all of those things make the ingredients that we're hoping that will create a follower of Jesus for a lifetime? And again, for years with good intentions, we've done it unintentionally, and I think as we start to look at ministry moving forward, really thinking intentionally about those things and knowing what to put on the calendar and what not, what to say
Yeah.
yes to, what to say no to, it informs all those things, and I think that's super helpful. And I could see how that would be really helpful for next gen leaders to sit down together at a local church and say, okay, now let's take this maybe is our ministry area. Let's take a bigger view back and say, how do we want? And I recognize not everybody walks into your church in first grade and goes all the way through 12th grade. But if you have an understanding of where they're at in the journey,
Yeah.
that's super helpful as
Yeah.
well.
And that's a great point to make. Yeah. It's not cookie cutter where like
Yeah,
everybody
exactly.
starts at zero or something. Yeah. And I think what you're saying, it speaks to I think a weakness that we have as humans, of the many we have.
Yeah,
One of our great weaknesses is wanting to wanting to measure everything and
yeah,
wanting to have like hard facts on uh the performance of something,
yeah.
and that can get in the way of true spiritual formation,
Mhm.
and being a Christ follower, because like I said, it's just, you can't measure that with a test tube. You can't measure
Sure.
that with a measuring stick.
Yeah,
You can measure, like, are you obeying the 10 commandments? It's like,
right.
have you murdered anybody last year?
Yeah,
No. Okay, check. Like those are easy to measure, and because we're humans, we like to measure things. That's what we
yeah,
focus on. But
yep,
the more difficult job is kind of going under the surface into our hearts and
Yeah.
allowing the Lord to form our hearts.
Yep.
And I'll say welcome to we
This is
have
Josh. He's one of
yeah.
our youth students.
What is up, Josh? Welcome to our discussion. You're free to stay muted or you can unmute, Josh, whatever you are comfortable with, or in whatever environment you're at. But we are talking about transitions right now. I had a question for you, Mark.
Yeah.
What are some of the, like, just practically speaking? What's up, Josh? All right. Um,
Sorry,
practically.
I'm driving home. Sorry, but
Oh,
I'm
you're
No,
listening.
you're good.
hey, you be safe. You be safe. Um, And Mark, practically speaking, what are some, like, I think of when I think of transitions, I think of like promotion Sunday, some people call it,
Sure.
or like, yeah, graduation ceremonies. Like, I know that with
Yeah.
the church I attended in my high school days, when the seniors graduated, there was a ceremony for us
Yeah.
at the church, even where they gave us each a Bible. It was just kind of a, and they even had like a little banquet for the graduating seniors.
Sure.
What would you say are some creative ideas that churches can do for uh like recognizing
Yeah.
transitions and like practical ways to kind of promote the students from one stage to the next with some sort of gift or ceremony
Yeah.
or acknowledgement. What have
Yeah.
you done or
Absolutely.
what have you seen?
I think one of even just the recognition of that is a big deal because I was reading a book from Mark Batterson. The book was about raising young men. It's called Play the Man. And one of the things that he identifies, which rings true not just for young men, certainly for young men, but also for young ladies as well, in American culture, we don't really celebrate those significant, like, growing up milestones in the way that a lot of other cultures do. And so one of the things he's talking about is recognizing these significant milestones in the life of your children, celebrating them, and communicating to them the significance of these transition moments in their lives. From a young boy becoming a young man, like those are big deals, and same is true with young ladies, and that's why you see in a lot of other cultures a lot of celebration around
Yeah.
those things.
The rites
Certainly
of
in the
passage.
Jewish faith, you see the bar
The
mitzvahs and the bat
mitzvah.
mitzvahs, and so we don't have those, and I think that's where you sometimes get a lot of the delayed adolescence. A lot of there's multiple factors to that, but I think not having clarity around some significant transitions in our lives does allow us sometimes to either trend young or sometimes the other way around. Like I feel like I'm more mature than I actually am at a particular stage in my life, and so
Hmm.
celebrating those milestones in our students' lives, I think are worth thinking through. I can certainly speak from the youth ministry side of what we did. Again, we had a graduate Sunday, a senior Sunday at our church where we had the students come up and they shared what was going to be happening. We had all of our leaders. This was one of the things that was cool that we did. We had any leader who ever worked with those students, all the way from kids ministries, Rangers, girls ministries, this idea that this has been a team of people who have invested in the lives of these students, certainly our youth leaders. They all came up and we'd lay hands on them, we'd pray for them. We always gave them the gift that we always gave them was a Bible, pretty nice Bible. I thought it wasn't one of the little Costco, $15 faux leather Bibles that were plastic. And then I would have all of our youth leaders take time and write a letter in the Bible to those students and all whatever blank page space they could find in the Bible. I cannot believe. So, like I said, I did it for 13 years and I'm now removed from youth ministry by about 10 years. No, that's not true. Thank God, not yet. But it's been about 2 decades of youth ministry. You would not believe how many of our young adults use those specific Bibles still, and how significant the letters in those Bibles to them were.
Hmm.
So many of them reread those letters all the time because usually it's some sort of encouragement, some sort of thinking forward, some sort of interaction that they return to as a well of support for them in those young adult years. It's an anchor for them to recognize we still care about you. We're still thinking about you. I try to articulate as clearly as I can with our kids that are graduating from our youth ministry. Listen, the reality is, in some ways, our relationship gets even cooler now that you're a young adult moving out of our youth ministry, because now we can build on genuine friend. Not that we weren't friendly or friends, but uh, uh, not in the same way that when you're under my youth ministry and I'm your leader in this youth ministry would be outside of that youth ministry. And I've got some tremendous relationships with young adults, and now that I've been in it for so long, some full-blown adults that was forged in those youth ministry years. And I'm like, listen, you graduate from the youth ministry, but you're not graduating from our life.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a benefit of having been in the same location for so long, right? I understand God calls different people to different places in different seasons. I was I've been I was blessed to be able to stay in one church for 13 years as the youth pastor there. So I got to see generation of kids come and go. And that longevity, it's a big deal in any ministry. Certainly it benefited those students that I had relationship for a long time with.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me think of Jesus's words, I no longer call you servants, but now I call you my friends.
Yeah, I love that.
Like these high school youth, now you can call them your friends.
I love
I
that.
yeah, it's yeah, this is beautiful. And I want to say welcome to Yancey. I see that you
Hi.
done as well. Yeah,
I know, I finally got freed up to come.
Oh no, that's great. We're and our friend Josh is here too. He's driving, so we're not gonna try not to interrupt him too much. But yeah, so Yancey,
Hello.
oh, what's up? Feel free to chime in, Josh, if you've got anything that you'd like to say or ask. In the terms of transitions. But I am like, so back to what you were saying real quick, Mark, about these that picture you painted even of the letters that they wrote in the Bible, like, and what that meant to those students later on. That just brought chill bumps to me as I was listening to that. That's such a powerful idea, and a very simple one too.
Yeah.
Like a gift that you can give, like in a transition moment, to help them remember the memory of the impact that these people made on them. And it makes me want to cue up the song "Thank You for Giving to the Lord."
Right, absolutely. Maybe Yancey can give us a few bars.
Yeah, with the slideshow. You need it with the slideshow. Yeah.
Yep. I'll tell you what too, what that does, like it's a reminder to my youth staff whether they had a genuine relationship with some of these students too. And now, like our youth ministry, again, thankfully, our youth ministry was large enough that's like certain leaders kind of oversaw different areas of a ministry, but we still did prioritize having some sort of relationship with all of our students. And there were times where you were sitting and looking, thankfully I was the youth pastor, so it didn't happen very frequently. But sometimes you're looking at a kid's Bible and you're like, man, I don't really know anything about this kid. And I would start that process with my staff, like earlier than like the week before that was going to happen. Like I would start passing those Bibles and starting to have them think about it like a month or two as they're getting ready to graduate, right? The last second half of that year, like start praying and thinking about what words of encouragement you want to share with these students. And if you don't know them really well, hey, take an opportunity to have a conversation with them here towards the end of the year. Like, listen, every senior in high school wants to talk to whether they know what they're doing next or not. They're always happy to talk to somebody about what's happening next. And so get a sense of what some of their anxieties and fears might be so you can be praying for them. Get a sense of what their next steps are so you can be praying for them, and be really intentional about, okay, they're almost done here in this youth ministry. I want to be as intentional as I can with the time that I have left with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to open it up to, Joshua or Yancey. Like, what are some things that either of you have seen work well in transitioning kids in ministry from, say, even preschool to elementary, or elementary to middle school ministry, or middle school to youth group to young adult? What are some things that you all have done or seen that's worked?
Okay, I'll go. I've got several things.
Okay.
For one, I'm in a church in Houston as we speak.
Yeah.
And as I've come into this small group room a few different times past couple of days to make a phone call or whatever, I noticed this little piece of paper that's like laying here on the table. And it literally says, come watch me play, name, school name, jersey number, sport, location, time.
Mm,
And I was
love that.
like, what a easy, tangible thing, a way that a kid could let their small group leader know the details so they can show up and be present in their life. And I'm like, there's so many topics that
cool.
you could just do something as simple as it's laying here on the table and the
yeah.
root there.
Yeah.
I just was like, that's a great idea. Took a picture
Cool.
of it. But a couple things. Okay, I'm going to speak as a parent real fast because
love that.
I have just walked through one of those transition phases. So my oldest is in 7th grade this year, which is when the transition happens at our church from children's ministry to youth ministry. And certainly, like, just walking through some of that this summer, I was like, wow, I've got a lot of thoughts and feedback and ideas for churches now, because to be honest, my son, he wasn't necessarily excited about the transition.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of feeling a little bit like, oh, I don't know what to expect with that. I don't necessarily know that I want to move up. I know that's maybe not the story of every kid, but you know, he literally hung on until the last week, you know, even though they had the option of you can kind of do both over the summer and experience, he was like, peace out. Like,
Yeah.
no introduction
Yeah.
until I'm like cut off and have to. And so, and which, you know, was interesting, but I also just realized as a parent, like leading up that first week, children's ministry and youth ministry operates very differently as far as the security of checking in your kid, dropping off your kid, like all of these things. And, you know, I realized as well, like, there was a lot more information I needed as a parent from the youth ministry of how to not be, I didn't want to be like overly present or hovering. And, you know, like, I didn't want to be uncool for my kid because I'm there to like check him in for you. And, you know, I found my husband and I, just because of what the information was that provided, didn't really answer like, what does drop off look like? What does pick off look like? You know, reaching out then personally that first Wednesday going, help us not be lame parents that are going to make our kid be a dork, you know?
Yep.
And so I just realized, I was like, wow, there could be a whole lot more information. And I will say, this hasn't been as big of a hiccup with my son because we're kind of the type of family, like, you're going to show up and you're going to go no matter what. But I have heard a little bit of this tension with him, but especially seen it with some of his friends where, you know, their mom's texting like, hey, is Sparrow going to be there this week? Because their kid does not want to go unless they know their people are going to be there. To walk into that room alone is like the heaviest weight to them. And I realized, I was like, wow, I feel like in some of those transition years, and this could happen in other age groups besides just kids to youth, but I think especially for youth, becoming aware that like this is such a thing with them, I was like, it's almost like they need a buddy system. So maybe how you would treat a special needs kid, you know, how they sometimes like have a worker that's their person that's with them. I'm like, I feel like if each of these students had maybe an adult leader and maybe even an older student in the youth ministry that's kind of their person, that they know when they walk in, that is the conversation, that's the person they can go find so that they're not alone. I just feel like that would be an amazing thing that I think youth ministries could do to help kids not fall through the cracks and feel like I don't have any friends in this area if my buddy doesn't show up that week.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was just my like creative, you know, just walking through it with as a mom. If I put on my ministry worship leader hat, I only have one hat here, so I can't truly change them. But I always tell people in the area of worship, And I think this applies preschool to elementary, it applies elementary to a preteen area, preteen to middle school, and so forth. The high schoolers preparing them for just being stuck with the adults all the time for church. Prepare them for what's coming next. And so, yes, you want to pick songs and you want to lead them in some ways that seem very intentional to that age group. But also, as an example, if your preschool worship time is worlds apart different from your elementary worship time, you're doing those kindergartners a disservice if they never have a song that's maybe more like what elementary looks like in those last 6 months. It doesn't have to be all the time, but being intentional, come January, especially March, April, May, like I've got to prep them. Not that you change everything that you do, but one song in your set could prep it. And I think the same thing is true if your elementary worship looks totally different, AKA if you're doing motions nonstop to every single song, God bless you, read my book. But if that's what you're doing and your student ministry worship looks nothing like that,
It's good.
honestly, we are contributing to the heart and hearts of kids going, church is not my home and my place.
It's good.
Because we're not preventing them from a very awkward moment when y'all happen to sing the same song and participation looks completely different between the two classes.
It's good.
And so, it's a balancing act. And then on the flip side, like the alternate thing, something just in me serving at the church that I'm a part of in a worship band in our elementary class, I'm like the music director playing keyboard for this live band. I have realized in those transitions beginning of the school year, those new kindergartners pop in, and it's like, I can see, the deer in the headlights look in their face. And it's like, there also needs to be a certain amount of education and teaching and transformation. You get so busy doing what you do and just thinking like, hop on board our train. But it's like that new group of kids coming in those first few months, they don't know which way your train goes.
Right.
And I feel like as a worship leader, both in some song choices you choose to do, it's the backwards version of that, bridging the gap a little bit, or maybe making sure, is this really the easiest song that we have? Or is this one of those songs that's like incredibly wordy and has a bunch of different parts? Maybe, save that for a little bit later in the season and give those kids some time to acclimate and learn, just because you're breaking it down and you're teaching to them, this is what worship looks like in this environment. And so that's something I've kind of have noticed these last two starts to the school year that really I had not processed before as a worship leader, but just was like, Houston, we have a problem.
Yeah.
That's so
That's
good,
good.
Yancey. Like that was like a blind spot on my radar in terms of transitions, the whole like looking at it through the lens of worship and music and
It's drastically different in some of these different age groups.
Totally. And being intentional about that, that's so helpful. Like to think about those things that you're thinking about and that you're sharing.
Yeah. So I like to ask the question, like, what do I need to prepare them for?
Yeah. And Josh, be safe, wherever you are, of course. I don't know if you're able to.
Stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm back at the office waiting for my wife
sweet.
to come out.
Sweet.
Yeah,
Well, what comes to your mind when you think of transitions in your ministry? Like what are some things that have worked?
What we have noticed, currently I serve at a multi-site church that is structured as a we take the next gen strategy for ministry. So from birth all the way through college, our next gen ministries are very integrated. There was a previous season where like kids ministry was kids ministry, youth ministry was youth, and college was college. But now we actually within like the last 6 to 8 years, we took the next gen strategy. So when I came on as the campus director for our largest campus, the one of the first things that we did that I loved was prior to our fifth graders entering into our our youth ministry, the week after Easter, we pretty much start our transition strategy. And what that pretty much looks like is we'll have one of our middle school guys and middle school girl leaders, and two students from each of those groups. They will then begin attending our elementary large group, hanging out with kids, building relationship with kids, all the way from the week after Easter, all the way into the summertime of them going into sixth grade. And what we've seen the benefit of that is, one, they know who their leaders are going to be. They'll know who they'll know some students in their life group, so that helps with that transition. Now they're not coming in not knowing anybody. They'll at least know 2 to 3, maybe sometimes 6 kids in their life group, because each week we'll filter out different kids. Now, if we do see that they connect with a particular student that's in our youth ministry, we'll keep that that student leader on. But oftentimes we rotate, just so they'll see different leaders, different students in their life group. That worked so well that this was the first year we actually did it. We don't do our transition starting at Easter. We do it for the entire school year. So the transition pretty much never stopped from last year. So now we've had student leaders and our actual adult leaders in kids ministry every single Sunday. And in fact, our student ministry took that, or our preschool and our elementary took that same model by having some of the kids and leaders transition all the way through from birth all the way up through college. Something else that we do for transitions that we also feel helps, those sixth graders that come in, they get to actually try out our youth ministry in the summertime. So once they graduate from fifth grade and they're now sixth graders in the summertime, they get into youth at what we call our block party. Every summer we have a big block party, moon bounces, games, food, come and see what youth ministry is all about. That's where we put on our best. That's our Super Bowl. That's our come and see event. So we invite them out to that, with the preface that this is not youth ministry every single week, but there's elements of this. We have bounce houses, we have food, we have games. We just may not do it on this scale every single week. But I think focusing on that, allowing students to serve in the kids ministry, I think that's been the biggest help for navigating those transitions. But something I've talked to Professor Freeman about this, but something I'm navigating right now with transition is not so much student transitions, but leadership transitions. Because I'll be leaving my current role as the Hagerstown campus director, and I'll be transferring to a new church, taking a full-time role as youth pastor. So I'm really thinking through how to finish well, certain things I want to see within the ministry before I leave, how to pass things off, how to empower my leaders. And the number one thing I'm concerned with is my students. Because over the last 10 years, they've had 6 different youth pastors. So within the last 5 years, I've been the most consistent leader they've had in the last 10 years. I've only been in this role for 3. Very tight, very close relationships. So that's something I'm really trying to navigate. So the gift idea that you guys were speaking about, that's something I'm now thinking through. What is a small trinket, a small gift I can leave in a note I can leave with my leaders and students, just to know that, Pastor Josh still loves them. Pastor Josh still cares for them. And I like what Professor Freeman said, just because I may be leaving the ministry, that they're not leaving my life. So making sure I continue to keep that connection, because I know it will just look differently. My pastoralship. I have a heart of lifelong pastorates. specifically because I've baptized some of these kids.
Hmm.
I've led some of these kids into salvation. I've led some of these kids into student leadership. So that's not something that I want to just leave them to themselves. So if you guys could, I know it's still on the conversation of transitions, but if you can speak a little bit about leadership transitions and what that look like, and how to transition well, and then how to start well at a new ministry, I feel like that would be particularly helpful for me in this season.
Good.
Yeah. That's
That's
not,
a
I mean,
whole Zoom session on its
yeah,
own.
I think that's a whole other First Wednesdays, I think. Yeah. Like transitioning positions, right. And leadership roles. That's, but yeah, well, we got a couple minutes left. Do either of you, Yancey or Mark, want to speak to that? And then we can tag it, Joshua, for like a whole future First Wednesdays, I think. But do
Good.
either of you want to?
Yeah.
I would appreciate that. I would
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Just a quick thought, just a continuation of that thought there, Josh. And the good that because we've shared some life together for a while now, I can a word of encouragement and then maybe just a practical thing. The good news is knowing how you communicate the gospel to students, you have made Jesus the hero of in their life. Their salvation doesn't hinge on Joshua being there because I know how you communicate the gospel.
Mhm.
Now, obviously, they see you as a part of their life, which is essential in ministry. But the biggest transition breakdowns that I saw was when a youth ministry was built on the personality of the leader, and when that leader either had some sort of a failure or left the ministry, it left the kids lost. But the good news is you have communicated the gospel in such a healthy way to your students that they will know that Christ still has them. Josh might not be there any longer, but they still have this eternal relationship with Christ. So I would find intentional ways of communicating that to your students, continuing to echo what you've probably already been putting into them. And then the little practical piece as it relates to the Bible. So I always put my cell number. Thankfully, I've kept my my cell number for a while, but I put my cell number in with my note with them as well. And I kid you not, I will have students that I have not seen for 4 or 5 years that will call me or text me with that cell number because they had it in their Bible that may not have opened that Bible for the last 4 or 5 years. And when they went to it, there was a lifeline in there for them and they got a hold of me. So I would consider if you've got a personal email that you know you're going to keep for a while and your cell number, those lifelines are significant for a student, and it continues to echo and to them, you don't lose contact with me when we're done in this situation. Here is a way that you can still get a hold of me. Now, of course, social media being what it is, it's easier for students to get that info. But it's still an intentional thought that says, here's the tether that we're still in relationship with.
Any thoughts, Yancey, on like transitioning roles?
Okay, my thoughts are more so kind of twofold. One, it's like I'm a pastor's kid, right? So what comes to my mind of thinking about is just the people in my, over the years in my dad's ministry that I've watched grow up through so many seasons of their life because the relationship does stay intact. And, thanks to social media, I think if anything, like this is a more successful time for that to take place. But, I just think of transitions, even though the church might have changed and moved away, but weddings were still done by my dad, and they had kids that now have had kids. And I think about these life cycles that I've been able to witness, all because of how he loved them, preached to them, was there when the parents were going through a divorce, whatever that rocky season in their life went. So I say that maybe as a piece of encouragement to you that the journey will be sweet and it will be rewarding.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
if you saw me tearing up even a minute ago while you were talking, I processed it on my side of things, and maybe this gets back to some of the stuff that Professor Freeman was talking about earlier. When I won my Dove Award a few years ago, what stood out most to me in the comments on social media were the people that had been there when I was a kid.
Mm.
And the people that had been there when I was a teenager, and all those people that saw me sing my first songs and specials and concerts when, truthfully, I probably wasn't that great at what I did. But their comments are the ones that stood out to me. And I think, if anything, had as much weight and joy in the celebration of that experience in my life, because they had walked with me. And honestly, it was a lot sweeter than just the ministry relationships that I've built in the last 20 years. And so, all that to say, the journey is sweet. And the ripple effect of your obedience goes farther than you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
Amen.
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 Yeah, Joshua, I would venture to say that you might not know it yet, but these students that you've invested in the past 3 to 5 years, you will always be their youth pastor.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
for the rest of their lives, they will remember you and they will still look to you as their youth pastor. You might be somewhere else, but I mean, I'm getting chill bumps because my youth pastor left in my 11th grade year of high school. And I always will consider him my youth pastor to this day, you know, and we got a new one my senior year, and he's great too. And he's kind of a youth pastor to me, but you know, so be encouraged that your labor is not in vain. You have invested in these students, and it will have eternal, you know, ripple effects and impacts, and you'll see that as you grow through life. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think I
I
know
appreciate
what our next first Wednesday is going to be.
Yeah. You gave us a good topic.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we've come upon our hour, so I think we can wrap things up. But I really appreciate all of you joining us, and we are the plan here. I did record this, Yancey and Joshua, before you came on, and it's still recording. So I'd love to, you know, upload this so that other people can watch it if that's okay with you guys, and so they can benefit from this conversation as well. And thank you all.
Where would this be located within Populi?
Yeah, well, I was going to put it on YouTube if that's okay, and then I can, and then
Okay, YouTube. Okay, okay.
I'll send you the link, and
You're
that
gonna
way,
be a
that works.
star.
yeah, and that way you can share it with whoever you like, and the idea is that when we do these first Wednesdays, we're going to capture the content, and then we can use it, you know, to serve our students and our faculty and beyond with content that hopefully can help people, these discussions. So that's the idea, that it's beyond just this moment. Yeah.
Sweet.
All right. Okay. Well, stay tuned for information for the next one. But until then, I hope you all have a great first Wednesday of the month.
Thank you. See you
Thanks,
soon.
Guys
Okay.
as well.
God bless you all.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.